Firstly, let me start by saying Happy Easter. Now, Easter is a very important part of the Christian faith. You could say the most important part. At Christmas, we celebrate the birth of God's Son. It's about God being with us. At Easter, we are reminded of the most important aspects of the Christian faith. That after his death, Jesus rose again. On that first Easter morning, the tomb where they'd put Jesus' body was empty, and many people started to encounter him. They started to spend time with him, and perhaps for the first time even begin to realise the significance of what had just happened. But in Luke 24, the chapter that tells of the resurrection of Jesus, in verse 13 it says this: "Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing them. He asked them, 'What are you discussing together as you walk along?'" It's interesting, isn't it, in that account that they were kept from recognizing Jesus. A little later, Jesus appeared to the disciples. We're told in verse 37 that they were startled and they were frightened because they thought he was a ghost. I'm sure most of us, even if we've never hung out in church before, have heard of a guy called Thomas, sometimes known as Doubting Thomas, who, when he met Jesus after Jesus' death, he wanted to see the marks that the nails had left. So many accounts where people didn't recognize Jesus. And it caused me to ponder, as I often do, why so many of my friends don't recognise who Jesus is. But I didn't have to ponder too long before I'm reminded of the times that I don't recognise who Jesus is. Times when I don't have enough faith to trust that God will provide for me. Times when, rather than turning to Christ in prayer, I try and fix problems myself. And times when, and without going into too much detail, I allow compromise into my life and I live sometimes in a way that isn't honouring to Christ. So maybe this Easter morning is a time for all of us, however much we've considered Jesus in the past, to stop and consider how much we recognise him today and who he really is. Perhaps to some simply a good man who lived years ago, perhaps even a great man who did great things. Or could I suggest someone that the world had been waiting for? Someone who did something that no one else ever did. Someone who is risen. Someone who is alive and can be part of our everyday lives. And maybe, if only metaphorically, today we need to take a little walk with Jesus and believe who he is.